Hey girls, and welcome to season 4 of the Hey Girl podcast. I'm your host, Bethany Needham. This season, we get to hear stories of faithfulness from stay-at-home mamas, business entrepreneurs, some amazing single ladies, your dearest friends, and your favorite authors. We hope these stories will continue to encourage you to run your race in your place. For more information and to connect with us, go find us on Instagram and Facebook. We're at HeyGirlPod, or you can join our email list through my website, bethanyneedham.com. As always, thanks for listening. If it weren't for you, I would literally be a crazy person talking to myself in a microphone. But thanks to your listening and sharing this podcast, I get to be a crazy person talking to you through a microphone. So grab a cup of coffee or a cold can of seltzer and let's get this episode started. Welcome back, ladies. I cannot wait to introduce you to this week's guest, Tessa Ashfar. So I first heard about Tessa actually through one of the books she had written. My husband brought it home from me from a conference, I believe, that he attended. And then he was able to connect us, and she was so gracious and willing to come share her story on Hey Girl. And you are going to be blown away. Tessa was born in Iran to a nominally Muslim family. Her story that she shares of coming to Jesus and Jesus like literally pursuing her in her dream is, I had just goosebumps for so long, even afterwards. It's an incredible story. I love talking to her about her faith journey. I even got over the fact that she did kind of ruin the image that I've had growing up of Jesus being a good-looking guy. But it's fine. It'll make way more sense once you hear her story. And I am telling you, after you've heard her story, heard her talk a little bit about the books that she writes, you're probably going to want to go out and buy some new books. So I hope you have some credit in the Amazon store so that you can go ahead and get it done. But before we get to this episode, real quick, I want to share with you, we got another amazing and encouraging review this week, and I just wanted to share it with you. Kels X3. I never know what to say when it's not like the actual name. I'm thinking Kelsey. So she gave us this review, 10 out of 10. Seriously, listen. I love this podcast. I actually stumbled across the Hey Girl devotional Holy Throwback that's available on the YouVersion Bible app and discovered that it was attached to this podcast. I decided to listen to it from the beginning, flew through it, got caught up sometime last fall, and I've been an avid listener ever since. I always walk away from an episode feeling inspired. I'm so thankful for Bethany and every other person who has been involved with this podcast for touching my life and having a positive impact in the lives of all its listeners. Girl, thank you so much. Not just for leaving a review, but also for giving that shout out and reminder that we do have a devotional on the YouVersion Bible app. In fact, our prayer and hope is that I'm just saying in the future that might increase, but there is one there. And like you said, Holy Throwback, it's back from season 1, but still, if you haven't checked it out, definitely go on your Bible app and check it out. So thanks for the shout out. Thank you for listening. I love that you found us late and are already all caught up. That's phenomenal. Well done. Like, literally gold star for you. Again, if you haven't left a review yet, it's not only encouraging to us, but it helps others to be able to find us. So take a few minutes, leave a review, and who knows, maybe next week it'll be your review that I'm reading on the podcast. So I'm just telling you, grab a blanket, grab, a notebook, can of seltzer, hot cup of coffee, whatever it is that you enjoy during these episodes. If you're a mom and you just got like your AirPods in and you're folding laundry, whatever it is, I am praying over you this moment as you listen to this story that it will mean as much to you and be as much of an encouragement as it was to me. So meet my new friend, Tessa Ashfar. Listeners, listeners, we are so excited because I get to sit today in, I want to say a studio, but I've already acknowledged to you, I don't even have a studio in my new house yet. I'm just sitting at the, not even my own kitchen counter right now, doing this recording because we have Tessa Ashfar. Oh, that's right. I didn't butcher the name in the studio. And Tessa, we're going to get to your story. I just have to say, I am very excited because your name came to me through my husband, who met you at a conference, but he brought home a book to me. And I think books are like among the top 3 of my love languages. Somebody gives me a book and I was like, oh, I'm so excited. So I'm thrilled to have you. So excited to hear your story. But why don't we just take a few moments, introduce yourself, tell our listeners a little bit about who you are.
My name is Tessa Ashfar. Who I am is the daughter of the Most High God, his beloved, and his friend. I do lots of stuff and I have lots of roles, but that's not who I am.
Girl, I love that. We'll just stop it there. So give me a little picture of right now. What does life look like just in terms of married, single? Are there kids? Do you have pets? I don't even know these things.
I am married to a wonderful man. He's very patient. He's an engineer and he's married to a creative who is a full-time author. And so it's been a huge blessing to me to have someone who's so well ordered and he loves lists and he plans, and I fly by the seat of my pants and I dream and I live in my head. So he's been good for me and I hope I've been fun for him. We're very blessed. We don't have children or pets because if I want a pet, I make one up. And they never go hungry. And when we travel, we don't have to worry about putting them in a kennel. It works out.
Okay, so now I need to know, do you have any recent made-up pets that you've named? And
Yes, I do actually. My next book that's coming out in February 2020 is based on Priscilla and Aquila's story, and they come to have a pet who adopts them, and his name is Ferox. So, because it's Latin, and so yeah, I'm really excited about that. Now, I don't have pets, but I do grow some plants. This year we grew some tomatoes, and I started also growing biblical stuff. So did you ever watch that movie that was about a woman who lived through a year of cooking and baking through Julia Child's book?
Yes.
So I thought, okay, I'm going to do that, but with the Bible. And so mine was a somewhat year of somewhat biblical cooking because I couldn't do it in 1 year. And then Old Testament, there are no surviving recipes. So I just had to look at essentially things that they mention, they name, and try and come up with a recipe for it based on what the Bible mentions they had. And one of the things women of that time would have done is they would have had their own little garden in the back, growing cucumbers and mint and dill and things like that. So I grew stuff like this. I'm a very bad tomato grower and a mediocre cucumber grower, kind of.
Well, I'm impressed that you just went for it.
Yes. Well, as long as you're doing things somewhat, it's very freeing because you don't feel obsessed by rules. And so it's been really actually a lot of fun.
I love that. So you have said tomato, which brings me to my immediate question. Clearly, you're not from around here.
Well, no, I mean, I am from around here in the sense that I am an American citizen and I live here. And this is my home. I love this country and I got to adopt it. So I didn't have to, I wasn't born here. I chose to be here. So I'm sort of like an adopted child where the parents say, well, everybody else gets to have their kids because they have no choice, but we actually chose you. So it's the same for me. But I was born in the Middle East. I lived there for the first 13 and a half years of my life. And then my parents were divorced and half of my family moved to England. So I learned English. I had schoolgirl English at school, but once I went to England is really where I learned English. And because half of my family still live in England, so I go back and forth and I speak to them obviously on the phone a lot. It means that my accent every once in a while like goes to the other side of the pond.
So what is your first language then?
I was born speaking Persian.
Okay. And do you still speak that fluently?
I do.
Oh, I feel like that would be a beautiful language too. But I know you're from the Middle East, but your accent, like I would have said English. Like I can hear that.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I definitely have an accent, and it's not purely English. It's like a mutt, and it's very endearing because of that.
I know. I was like, you have the kind of accent that I want you to read all of my audiobooks to me.
So sweet. Thank you. I will hug that description to myself tonight, because to be honest, it's not the most fun thing for me to have an accent. I would have, for years, I wanted just to blend in and speak like everybody else, but I haven't been able to. So, yeah.
No, I'm so glad that that prayer was not answered and that you still have this beautiful accent.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Well, there we go. I can't do anything about it. So.
Well, obviously, growing up in the Middle East, there's a hint towards, that you have quite a story, especially that of coming to faith from just where you come from, your background. So tell me a little bit about that, or tell me a lot about that, actually. Please don't hold back. What was it like for you, where you came from, and how did you end up coming to know Jesus and following him?
So I grew up in a nominally Muslim family, which meant that we believed in God, but we didn't really practice the faith. My mother didn't wear a covering. So in some ways, we really weren't all that different from nominal Christians. You believe in sort of being good, sort of being honest, but you make God in your own image inside your own head, more or less. But I grew up in a sense with a perspective that you don't need religion. That if you're strong enough, if you're hardworking enough, if you're smart enough, if you're enough, there's no need for all this religious stuff. And that's truly what I believed. That I was raised believing that. And so when we went to England, I went to a boarding school for girls. A lovely place because I got to meet Charlotte Bronte, not in person, but in book form. And I got to fall in love with Jane Austen. And so I learned a lot. And every Sunday in boarding school, we had to go to church, not because it was a religious school, but because that was tradition. And when you go to boarding school, it tends to be very traditional in England. So because I was from a different faith background, I was told that I could sit upstairs in the balcony with other girls who were from other faiths. And I had to read our own book of faith, the way a Christian would have read the Bible. Well, what they didn't comprehend was that actually for Muslims, reading the Quran is not, it doesn't work the same way. First of all, you have to read it in Arabic, in its original language, in order for it to be efficacious. I couldn't read Arabic. I read Persian, so they're completely different languages. And so it didn't mean anything really to read the Quran. I didn't want to argue, so I used to sneak a book into church with me, and I used to read in church, as they told me, but I used to read romance novels. And I did learn a lot about love, but it wasn't quite what Jesus had in mind. So I never heard the gospel growing up, even though I was in church. And then I went to college, and again, the only exposure I had to Jesus during those years was, particularly in England, they used to show a couple of movies during Easter and Christmas, Bible movies. And in those movies, the actor that portrayed Jesus was very good looking. One of them, he was blonde and blue eyed, and one of them, he had a very aquiline nose. And, it's just as you would imagine Jesus to be. He was good looking. Well, after college, I still hadn't heard the Bible, still hadn't heard the gospel really, still was nowhere near being a Christian. But I went through a very difficult season in my mid-20s. And as I was going through that season, I had no answers. My life had come to a traumatic wall. I had crashed against the wall. And I didn't know what to do. And during that time, I had a dream. So my first encounter with Jesus was through a dream, really. In that dream, I was by the Sea of Galilee, and I saw Jesus walking toward me in the dream. In the dream, I knew he was Jesus. When he came close enough for me to see his features, I'm probably the only person in the universe who will one day have to admit that my first response to Jesus when I saw him was disappointment. The reason for that is that the Jesus in my dream was not very good looking. He was kind of plain and that's being kind. And so I remember thinking, that's Jesus? Like God couldn't do any better for his son? But the reality is that long after this, months after this, when I started reading the Bible, I would come upon a passage in Isaiah foreshadowing the Messiah, foreshadowing Jesus. And it talks about the fact he actually wasn't much to look at.
I was going to say, that's very biblical.
Right. And so my dream aligned not with the movies I had seen from Hollywood, but with the Word of God. And then as he walked closer toward me, I came to a place where I could see his eyes very clearly. And I thought, of course, that's Jesus. Because in his eyes, Bethany, I saw such love and such power that it almost brought me to my knees. I will never see anything like that again until he returns or I go home. The love that is in those eyes is the love that took him to the cross. But it is undergirded by the power that put the stars in place and named them. So when Jesus came close to me, he sort of just motioned for me to follow. We sat in a boat and we went for a ride on the Sea of Galilee in this stream. And the details of the dream are, I think they have more to do with my calling than they have to do with my faith. But one thing about it I will share here, and that is that in the dream, I knew that he was the Son of God. I knew that he was very God of very God. I couldn't have written a thesis on it, but I knew absolutely that whatever he was telling me would come to pass, even though some of the things that he was asking me to do were kind of crazy and impossible. But in the dream, I would say, but he's the Son of God. And if he says we will do this, we will do this. That was my first introduction to Jesus. When I woke up, I did not become a Christian. I still didn't know what the gospel was, other than follow me.
A couple of things. One, so your only introduction to Jesus at this point had been things you saw in movies or pictures or whatnot. And maybe you don't necessarily even know this in the dream, but when you saw Jesus and you knew it was him, was it like, I've been doing this Bible study, and it's so, even as you wrote it, I wrote it down on my notes, because this morning, one of the things it was saying in my Bible study was in the Old Testament, when people encountered God, there was like a handful of things that were true. And one of the first things it said was they knew that it was him. Like, and it went through all these examples, and I'm like, isn't that so powerful and important to remember that was not just the God of the Old Testament, and that basically God can reveal himself to anyone at any time, however he wants. But even I'm thinking of your story, like someone who had never heard the gospel, and in a dream, not only appear to you, but that for you to know, just to know that it was him.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was a move of grace. I often talk about Jesus pursuing us in love because I was pursued. I didn't go looking for him, but he knew at that point I was broken enough that all my old prejudices about religion and all my sense of almost arrogant pride about my not needing all of that had come to a crashing place. And finally I was ready, but there was nobody sharing the message of the gospel with me. I think people didn't want to offend me. I completely understand that. I don't want to offend people today, so I comprehended, but Jesus kind of got tired of waiting, and he said, the fields are white, let's go. And so he came to me in the dream. When I woke up from that dream, I don't believe I was a Christian yet, even though in the dream I had known that Jesus was the Son of God, and when he asked me to follow him, I did. So there was a subconscious part of me that had said yes, but the rest of me had to catch up. What I had was 3 days of unshakable peace, nothing that I can describe. My circumstances hadn't changed, but instead of having sorrow and fear and a broken heart and grief, I just had peace, and nothing shook it. I think that I tasted a little bit of heaven, to be honest. It's just a supernatural visitation of Jesus. He leaves a little bit of himself behind. When we are in his presence, all of those things will just fall away from us. So you can't be anxious when you're in his presence. It's simply impossible. And so after that, my conscious mind and heart had to catch up. So it was shortly after that I returned to the US. At the time I had the dream, I was in England, but I returned to the US, and suddenly for the first time I was surrounded by Christians who were bold. And they invited me to Bible study. They invited me to church. And I remember noticing something different about them. And I kept saying, well, you're kind of different. What is it about you? And they kept saying, Jesus. I was like, yeah. Besides that, because really, I don't need that religious stuff. I just want to know, like, what are your do's and don'ts list? Like, I feel like you have a secret to life, and I want to have that secret. And they kept saying, Jesus.
Were you remembering in this time? Like, could you remember your dream as they're speaking to you? Like, were you thinking to yourself, he's not even that good looking? Like, what's the deal?
The dream at the time I was going through this was not giving context to the search. It was there in the back of my mind as a very odd experience that I've had. But it wasn't the proof that this is who Jesus is. I was looking at these people and the dream sort of separately at that point. But the dream had prepared my mind to hear the gospel. So I just remember one day, I thought to myself, 99.9% I'm right and they're wrong. I mean, that's how sure I was that I was right. But 0.1%, what if they're right? What am I losing out on? And that what if, that 0.1% what if broke my objections enough for God to get a foot in. And I remember a few months later, I was at, they would invite me to all sorts of things, Bible study and retreats and things like that. So I was at a Christian retreat, and an old pastor who was quite old, he was an old Persian pastor, and he couldn't see very well. He came to me and he sort of gazed at me through those cloudy eyes, and he said, Tessa, when are you going to come to Christ? And seriously, I'm going in my mind all the snappy answers that I can give, like never, or impolite answers. And I opened my mouth just to say something to get rid of him. And what came out of my mouth was, I already have. And I don't know which one of us was more shocked, him or me, because that was not the answer I had prepared. And when it came out of my mouth, I realized it was true. So the Holy Spirit spoke that answer through me. And it was only as it came out that I realized that all my objections, all my...
Can you hear my dog? Sorry. This is real life, people. Someone's knocking on my door and the dog's barking.
Well, exactly. literally like your dog, I sort of realized that someone's knocking on the door and I'm going to say welcome, because all my objections meant nothing. I mean, in that moment when I said the words, I knew that I had received it. So that's my story of faith.
That is beautiful. So many things. Have you ever read or heard of the book The Heavenly Man?
I have not.
So The Heavenly Man, one of the things, if you've never read the book or if people are listening, they've never read it, I recommend it 1,000 times over. And it's of course, my style book. It's a man telling his story. But the thing about that book that God used in my life, very similar to your story, is it's somebody sharing about being in a place where really the gospel, by man's definition or man's explanation, there was no way for it to get to this man where he was at in China, and his story of how God pursued him from dreams to just things that you're like, when I first read the book, I put it down after just like a short while in it, because I was at this place where I'm like, this can't be true. Like I literally was like just disbelieving. And God convicted my heart so strongly. And just in terms of, when did you get to decide how I reveal myself to other people? Like, when did this have to be? Because I grew up seeing, I grew up in like a Baptist preacher's daughter. Like, well, that couldn't have happened because the preacher has to preach the sermon. He's got to share the Romans road. There's steps to this. They go forward, they get on their knees, and God just completely blew open these blinders I didn't even know that I had, in terms of how much bigger his mission and the work that he was doing beyond what I even knew, like all around the world. So hearing this story from you, I was like, oh my goodness, this is just one of those where if you had come on here 5 years ago, I guess it was more than 5 years ago, before I read that book, I would have been having like that same internal wrestling, like, come on, that didn't really happen. But my own journey with Christ and what he's revealed and taught and challenged me, I'm more like, it almost like fills me with this excitement of just seeing the different ways that God shows up. Instead of disbelieving, it actually now fuels my belief, in terms of, oh my goodness, like the things that we don't even know that God's doing right now in the Middle East or in China, all of these places, in tribes that we have not even found yet, that God is meeting these people, and that they know, like that beautiful picture of your dream, like you knew it was him. I love it. So you're coming from, as you described, a nominally, I can't even say that word, Muslim family. You've now come to know Jesus. I am assuming that from that decision to now, there's probably been a lot of things, even in terms of, relationship with your family, your background, different things you've had to work through. What have been some kind of major things along the way that have brought you even to today where we sit?
I mean, there's so many things that, because of course it's over 25 years ago when that happened. It's funny, I think we Christians, our whole faith is based on incredible miracles. We believe in the virgin birth. We believe in the resurrection of the dead. We believe that our Lord was resurrected from the dead. But, dreams and prophecies and things like that really trip us up, or can trip us up. But because of that experience, I was sort of an open vessel. It took me a while. Like, I didn't believe in angels and the devil and all of that. So I read C.S. Lewis's novels, and they made me believe in, like, his trilogy that talks about Perlandra. He talks about the Eldila, and the Eldila are a model for angels. And I was like, oh, I can believe in the Eldila. That's what angels are. They're not like fat cherubs. Oh, okay, those, I can really believe in that. And so, I sort of grew into all the aspects of Christianity. And I grew into the fullness of the faith. As I read the word, stopped seeming so outlandish to me. The miracles became acceptable. And my father, when I was baptized, he actually came to my baptism and he saw a change in me, because when the Spirit of God starts residing in you, if you walk with him, you will start changing. So he started reading the Bible. My father was a radiologist, he was a physician, he was a man of science, and so he wasn't into really all these aspects of the supernatural and all of that. And he started reading the Bible just to see what happened to my daughter. And I remember at the beginning he would read the Old Testament and he would start laughing sometimes and sort of throw the Bible and say, "You cannot seriously believe in this." The thing is, I had a lot of compassion for him. We never argued. I didn't try to sort of change his mind, because I'd been through that road and I understood, and I showed him compassion and I said, "I know it's really hard, isn't it?" So he started going to Bible study because we weren't fighting, and he just was like, "Well, I want to learn a little more." And one day he looked at me and said, "All the holy men in the world to one side, Jesus to the other. He's really different from everybody, isn't he?" And that's the moment when I knew God had him. So my father was baptized when he was in his early 70s.
Wow.
My mother was also baptized. She came to the Lord afterwards. My mother was quite a bit younger than my dad. They were divorced, as I mentioned. And she came by a very different road. When my mother first found out that I was going to be baptized, she wrote me a letter. Those were the days before email. People actually still sent letters. For those of you listening to this podcast who are younger, yes, it actually had a stamp on it. Those are stamps. Back then you actually had to lick it to stick it on an envelope. So she sent me a letter, and when I pulled it out, it had tear stains on 6 pages, because she was so sad that I was going to be baptized. Not why am I becoming a Christian, but why am I becoming religious? The only way she could understand it. Well, down the road, she fell in love with Jesus. And she still, I think that there are still aspects of her theology that Jesus is going to have to set straight. But that's true for all of us, isn't it? And one day we'll come to heaven and Jesus will say, "Well, you got that wrong and that wrong." Fortunately for you, that's not how you get saved. But so, it's really kind of amazing. I watch different members of my family come to the Lord. Not all of them. My brother is still, he's like the last bastion holding out. But these are moments when I saw the Lord work in incredible ways, drawing hearts to him, bringing healing to our family. So it's been an incredible journey.
I think that's beautiful. I love that line you said about, there are things with my mom that Jesus is going to have to set theology straight. Because don't we waste so much time here trying to be the ones to set everybody's theology straight? I mean, you just crushed my dreams of a really good-looking Jesus. I'm still mourning that on this side. But I think it's incredible, even just you sharing about with your dad, not arguing with him, just having compassion for him and loving him, and how even in his, laughing or questioning, that continued to draw him in to Jesus. And it's beautiful. So obviously that was 25 years ago, the dream, everything we're talking about, but you, now where you're at, I love that so many of your family members have come to know the Lord, but you have some really cool aspects, parts, I don't know the right word, of your race, just the season of life you're in right now. I hinted towards one at the beginning that my husband brought me a book that you wrote. I have all the respect and appreciation and really admiration for authors. The more that I talk to people who have written books and what it takes to write a book, and then people who have written multiple books like you, I think it's incredible. So let's just take some time. Tell me a little bit about what this chapter in your life looks like.
I think since I was a child, I felt that I had the gift of writing because others spoke that into me. But at the same time, I went to a school system and I was part of a culture where you had to be incredibly good. I was definitely an underachiever as a kid. Every report card that came home essentially said, could do better, should try harder, really smart, but does not work. And it didn't help because my dad was really very science oriented. When my report cards were all A's, I just wasn't naturally good at math. So I didn't do any work. So I would come home with a report card full of A's and a C. He would say, oh, this is really good, but what about your math? And that was sort of like the theme of my life, was what about the part that you have failed? And so I kind of internalized that as, you forget about writing as your calling. That's kind of a fun thing, a play thing, but that's not a calling. That's not what you do with your life. Also, you're never going to be good enough because that had been sort of like the story of that had been told to me, was in order for you to be good enough to be a writer, you have to be Tolstoy. And I didn't think I was Tolstoy. And I'm not, because God had already made Tolstoy and he didn't need another one. But it took me a long time. So I'm really a late bloomer. It took me a long time. Every time I would write, I would feel like, well, nobody was going to want to read this, and I would give up. I never finished a story. When I was in my 20s, before I became a Christian, I wanted to write romance novels. I wanted to be a romance novelist. And the Lord didn't want me to be a romance novelist. He had a different plan in mind. And so he kind of blocked that. But when I became a Christian, I remember one time I was praying in the new year and I was saying, Lord, I really would love to write. And I had a sense that this was the year that if I didn't follow through, if I didn't finish, and if I didn't pursue this properly, that it would be too late. I really had that sense. And so I made a commitment to Jesus. I said, I will write a book and I will finish it this year for you. And because I had worked in the church and I had a degree, a divinity degree, so I knew the Bible somewhat. So I started writing a story about Rahab, because that whole image of a woman who lives in a wall, that is just like perfect for writing. And I started writing this novel, and almost every day that I wrote, I struggled with discouragement. I had a voice saying to me consistently, nobody will ever read this. This is not any good. And so because I had made a commitment to Jesus, I pushed through and I wrote it. But I think a lot of times, if you're trying to come in alignment with your calling from God, you will have blocks to that. Because if you're in alignment with God about your calling, it will accomplish kingdom things. It will bring God's purpose into earth, and the enemy doesn't like it. He will try to break you. And so he will find where you are vulnerable, and he will come through that door of vulnerability. My door of vulnerability was I had a lot of self-doubt. And he spoke through that door over and over again. That book went on to be published. It's called Pearl in the Sand. It went on to be published. And to this day, I get letters from people around the world. It's in, I think, 8-9 languages, something like that now.
Wow.
And what's in fact, in 2020, they're releasing the 10-year anniversary version. So
what is the name of it again?
It's called Pearl in the Sand.
Pearl in the Sand.
It's because it's the story of Rahab, and it's really the story. It's a love story because Rahab went on to marry one of the leaders of Judah, Salmon. But it's also the love story of God for Rahab, because God chose Rahab. So I wanted to see what is it about this woman who is in fact a woman with a past? And not only is she an outsider, but she is a zonah, which is in Hebrew, it means a prostitute. And yet this is the woman that God chooses to marry one of the leaders of the tribe of Judah, who goes on to be in the lineage of Jesus. So some of those DNA are in the bloodstreams of our Lord. And so this book kind of seeks the answer to that. And one of the things it also answers is the ways we are damaged and we experience being damaged in life. You can't have lived the life that she lived without some sense of damage. And there's a scene that deals specifically with that. That scene came out of my own life. It was God speaking to me in terms of how I felt about myself. And that particular scene is where the name of the book comes from, Pearl in the Sand. I got a name, I got a letter from a guy who said, I am a construction worker covered in tattoos, 250 pounds. And I cried like a baby when I read that scene. Because people see their worth in God. They see how broken she is, and they kind of can say, yeah, I can relate to feeling broken, feeling rejectable, feeling unlovable, guilty, shamed, feeling all those things about things that have happened to me, things that I've participated in. And all of a sudden entering into the reality, I'm God's beloved. I'm a jewel that will not become less because it's been stepped on. You're still a jewel.
And the whole time you're writing and telling this story, the enemy is just at you. And
absolutely. There's a part of me that only wrote the story because I'd made a commitment to Jesus.
I just think all of us need to hear this story, to hear stories like this, in terms of you don't even know what God wants to do with something. And I am for sure guilty of stopping short of something in believing a lie or many lies, or even just thinking like, this just isn't worth people's time. Like, and you don't know. And even since doing this podcast, there have been times where we've done things or released things that aren't like even necessarily other people's stories, but just stuff that I'm like, yeah, I don't know. And I would have stopped it, but almost like your commitment to Jesus, I felt like, well, I committed to do this. And so, I feel like across the board, it's always the ones that I feel the most like I hear more lies about, that God does the most powerful things through, that to me were like, maybe it's like an Instagram post or something that I'm like, oh, I butchered that, or I don't write well, whatever it is. And God's like, listen, I just need you to do your part, and then let me do mine.
That's precisely it. When it comes to our destiny, it will absolutely be under attack. Every little morsel of it will be under attack. As I said, it has power for the kingdom, and the enemy knows it so much better than we are. And so he will come against it. I think, there are aspects of, you have to know yourself well enough. Like if I were to start dreaming about being a physicist, I would not be in alignment with God, because I can hardly do simple math, let alone be a physicist. So if that became my dream and that became the thing that I wanted to pursue, God is not going to break open doors for that. It's not what he's made me for. So you have to be very careful that you're not dreaming of the wrong things and pouring all your dreams and energy and longings into that. But once you start dreaming of the right things, you will hear all sorts of attack, and you will experience all sorts of attacks in that area. And that's really a sign that you should push harder.
That's such an important lesson because it's really that difference of you can do anything, which we love, like graduations and with kids. I was with my son in the car the other day and he was making some sort of silly Snapchat video and he was like, Mom, I want to, and he said something like some ridiculous baseball goal that he had. He's like, do you believe that I can do it? And I was like, I mean, sure. Like technically he could. And he's like, yeah, my mom believes I can do anything I want to. And I was like, well, it's like, let's backtrack here. It's like at the risk of sounding like a terrible mother, I just think I've been reading a lot or studying this idea of what it looks like to really to rather than bringing my visions and dreams before God is going before God with it. God, show me your dreams and the work that you're already doing that you're inviting me to be a part of, rather than coming to him with something and be like, oh, I want to do this, can you bless it? I was telling a friend, actually a girl I met earlier today, I said, I sometimes think we treat God like the fairy dust on top of our dreams and visions, where we're like, we come up with this great idea, but then, we want God to, well, obviously if God's not there, then it won't be good. So we sprinkle him on top and then we want to launch it out there like, okay, now it's good. It's got my God dust. It's got all my great ideas. And if you are a dreamer, which I am wired that way, you could come up with ideas all day long that 90% of them could be not at all what God is doing. And what does it look like to slow down and know? I love that you said know yourself, to pay attention to, okay, what is God actually stirring? What are the things that he has created uniquely in me, these gifts that he's given me, even just the passions of your heart that we can take for granted, that God's like, no, that's not on accident, that this thing brings you to tears every single time it comes up, that your heart bleeds for this thing or whatever it is, that this is all part of what I'm doing and inviting you into.
I think whatever you are, if you give every part of yourself, and that part of yourself, there's a pastor who used to say, Lord, I'm the quarter in your pocket, spend me what you want, how you want. I think I'm more like a nickel. It's the thing, I'm the change in your pocket, spend me how you want.
So I love that you write books. I know you also speak, you travel and speak. That's how my husband met you. Are there any other, because you're obviously a creative, this is bubbling up, somebody who creates, anything else in this kind of season of your life that you feel like this is what your kind of day to day looks like, in terms of, like you said, God spending you out how he likes?
Because I write mostly fiction the past few years, and this year I've been released to do nonfiction. So I'm doing a study for Moody Publishers, a DVD Bible study of Ruth. I think everybody sort of would assume that these things, and I'm in public and I speak, that these are sort of like the core of my life. They're not. The core of my life is relationship. It's relationship with God. It's relationship with my husband. That's my job, is to be the best wife I possibly can be, and the best daughter to God I possibly can be. Other things, they're sort of on the side and they're part of what I do, and I have deadlines and all of that, but sometimes they're fun, sometimes they're extremely stressful. But in all those circumstances, they're lifted up to Jesus when they're done rightly. They're not me. I do writing, I am not writing. That's not who I am.
I think that's so, I'm sure it's huge for anyone, but especially with people who create things and who do things that can very easily get intertwined with their identity and who they are. Like when people speak, it's often that temptation to be like, well, I'm a speaker. That's well, it's what I do, but like you said, it's not my identity. I'm curious for those people who are listening, even myself, who can wrestle with that tension of not letting our identity get wrapped up in these things that we do. Have you found anything over these years that you've done writing, you've done speaking, practical ways that you kind of keep those things very clear in your own life, in your own mind?
I'm very vocal about it because I started off having this bent in my soul. My soul was all about accomplishing and achieving. I found my worth in what I accomplished. And I write about it, and it shows up in my writing sometimes, because what I learned was that that is a destructive road.
Hmm.
It's a lie, and it's a destructive road. You have to get to a place with God where when you wake up in the morning, before you've accomplished anything, with all the stuff that's going on, the first thing, you open your eyes and you feel, I'm loved, I'm protected, I belong.
Hmm.
And I live in the security of God. And whether I accomplish something good today, whether I'm a total failure today, whether I experience something painful today, it doesn't change the fact I've got that foundation.
Hmm.
And I think you have to battle for it. And again, you have to know your soul. Where does your worth come from? In all fairness, in all clarity, you have to know yourself.
I love that you said too that you intentionally say it a lot. It's almost like I'm not just saying it to you, I'm saying it to that inner part of us that all like tugs the other way. Is sometimes I'm learning this in my own life, that I need to not always battle things in my own mind, that there's power in speaking things out loud and repeating or saying them however loud I need to say them, or to whomever they need to be said. That actually has more to do with I need to hear this than it does that they need to hear it. I like the fact, even from the very beginning of this interview, when, tell us who you are, that you are very intentional about, I'll tell you who I am, and it's not what I do. So it's beautiful. So we are Hey Girl podcast. Obviously, target audience tends to be women, girls, whatever. We do have men that listen. Every once in a while, they pop into comments like, just so you know, like, I'm here. So we joke that they're like our closet male listeners, and we don't like to out them unless they want to be outed. But I thought for season 4, just to be fun, we would, rather than fight against that we're like a girls podcast, we would just embrace literally the cliches that go with what people presume when they think about a girly podcast, which is that we're just emotional and all the feels. And we would wrap up each episode by just literally feeling all of our feelings. And so I have a couple, these are kind of rapid fire questions. You don't have to overthink them, but they help us kind of get to know another side of you. So are you ready for this? Are you ready to feel your feelings with me, Tessa? So let's start with, what is something that makes you cry?
I cry really easily. If my husband looks me deep in the eyes and says, I love you so much, that makes me cry. Or if I watch a movie, that makes me cry. Books make me cry all the time. Oh my gosh. Or if my friends are going through a hard time and I'm praying for them and I don't understand why they're going through that, I will definitely cry then.
You're an empathizer, I can tell. Yeah, you feel with people. I love that. So then what is something that scares you? Something that like makes you almost pee your pants?
Disappointing people.
Really?
Well, and you have to, it's a big thing, because when you do public speaking and people have gone to a lot of trouble and there's a whole event wrapped around and you're the centerpiece, what if they don't like it? What if they're disappointed?
Oh, you're speaking to my heart and soul right now. That is so, or people, I always think when I go to an event, like people paid money, like hard earned money.
And gave up time, which is all.
Yes. And I'm it.
And it's all leaning on you that way. What if they look at you and they're like, okay?
Yes.
That makes your pants totally makes me pee my pants.
Oh, you preaching to the choir. So then what is something in your life that just makes you angry?
Injustice at any point, at any level. So like if I'm driving and somebody cuts me off and they don't even care. If at work, if someone is treated unfairly, or if they treat me unfairly, or if they accuse me of something I didn't do, that makes me.
Yeah. Someday I'm going to have this psychoanalyzed in myself, but I am in line with you in like the fear of disappointing people, but it runs to this unhealthy depth that when I'm in my car, if somebody like cuts me off or they do something like that, it's almost like I think that they can hear me, and I have this weird pressure. Like my response is always like, well, if you really needed that spot, I'm like afraid to be like, I need to learn to feel anger when it's justified. And I'm almost like, well, I don't want to upset anyone.
I think that's injustice. If he had or she had no right to do that, and they're not even sorry. That's what really gets me. Is if they're like, I'm so sorry or something, you're like, okay. But if they're endangering your life by, cutting you off, and they don't even care, that's unjust.
Yeah, I need to tap into it. It's definitely like an unhealthy people pleaser in me that like feels like, well, I can't be mad.
Yes, you should.
So tell me, in a world that it is getting harder and harder to find quiet spaces, places to rest, what is something in your life right now that just makes you feel rested?
Oh my word, that's such a great question. I think I just go out and I spend time with my herbs and my tomatoes. I pick them and I touch them. And I watch. My husband told me that he had planted some plants. They were secret plants in front of my office, my writing room, at the beginning of summer, and finally they grew and they were these amazing sunflowers. And these finches come and sit and rest in them and eat and sing. So I just sit and watch that, and it keeps going back to, because my husband, when he planted them, they wouldn't grow. Like we planted seeds at the same time. I did the cucumbers, he did the sunflowers, and the cucumbers came out fast and they were big. And so my husband compared the two, and he was like, I should just give up gardening. I'm a terrible gardener. And then his seeds came up, and the seedlings were really small and weakling, and he was just looking at it as a sort of an indictment on him, not on the plants, not on the seeds, but on him. And it turns out he was so wrong, because those sunflowers, they are taller than I am, and they've been the source of so much joy and pleasure for me.
If you don't already have like a message or sermon with that illustration, you need to write it.
I just did, actually, when we did the roof thing, but it was amazing to me. Again, we so often see ourselves, we understand and conclude the world around us wrongly. We interpret the world around us, our histories, the things that have happened to us, as a reflection of who we are. It's often the wrong interpretation. My husband is an amazing gardener.
I just love, have you ever told him like, honey, that was so nice, but I actually get no work done anymore because I'm just staring at them?
I don't, because I don't want him even to have a really, in a joking way, any moment of doubt how much pleasure it brought me. But I don't get work done sometimes.
I mean, sunflowers and then the birds, that's over the top.
Yellow finches, and they sit there and sing for me. Come on, it's like a few feet from my window. Seriously.
You're like Cinderella. Mice are going to show up and start dressing you soon.
If mice come here, it's a war. And I aim to win.
So then I love laughter. It is one of my favorite things. Tell me what in your life makes you laugh the most right now?
But just about everything. I laugh easy. I mean, it doesn't take much. You know, you eat too much beans. Yeah, a scene in a movie I read. My husband he has a great sense of humor, and I get it. So, like, to me, all he has to do is like make a teasing comment, and I'm just happy.
I love it. I think between your laughter and your rest, you're on a healthy track to just live many long, happy, laughing years.
I cry easy and I laugh easy, and I also I feel stress easy. So I have to find healthy outlets for that, because again, the Lord has called me to a lifestyle that's scary. If you are the kind of person who is afraid of letting people down and disappointing them, but you're always in a position to do that because you're speaking publicly, or you're writing, and there are all these people who say, I can't wait to read your next book. Oh my gosh, I hope you like it. You know? So you're consistently in a position where that part of you that's just weak and fragile is under pressure. So if I don't laugh easy, and if I don't cling to God hard, then I'm in trouble.
I also think you just can't target emotions. Like one can't be held down while one's released to go. And part of what I think, even my experience of you in this short time in your depth, is that you allow depth in all of these areas. Like you allow laughter and tears and all of these things to flow. And the freedom in that, even though with the good comes the difficult, is that you get to experience levels of joy that, you know, those of us who try to avoid suffering don't get to experience. Because if we don't go to that depth in suffering and hardship, then we can't just decide to go there in joy and peace and all of these other areas. So I think it's beautiful. I love that your answers were, I don't know, that just happens really easily, because it just is that picture of it flows. It is. So
you're right. You can't shut off one valve and have the other flow. We are made in a wholeness, and if you want to be the real you, if you want to be the true you, you've got to let all of it come out before the light of God.
Absolutely. Well, Tessa, this has been so wonderful. I have loved hearing your story.
Thank you. It's been wonderful hanging out with you.
And I just want you to know I'm not disappointed, and I forgive you for destroying my handsome image of Jesus.
Hey, that's on him.
Truth. Oh, thanks so much, Tessa.
Definitely, I appreciate it.
Wow. What a story. It struck me like so powerfully, that reminder of how God pursues us, and how just even that, the story from Tessa about Jesus coming to her in a dream, and remembering that maybe the things I sometimes like box God in, and how he shows up in people's lives. And I love hearing these stories that just kind of remind me that God is God and he can do so much more than I could ever imagine or think possible. And I don't know, I needed to be reminded of that today. I needed to be reminded that God moves in powerful and mysterious ways that don't always make sense to me. And I think it's incredible. I am still a little devastated about Jesus not being super attractive, but I suppose it's biblical, so we're going to go with this. Listen, if this story was something that just meant a lot to you, or something stood out to you, take some time and let us know. I've mentioned this before, but you can come connect with us on social media. We're at Hey Girl Pod. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook. We would love to hear from you. But also, you can find Tessa Ashfar on her website at tessaashfar.com. You can find her on Facebook, and just go check out more of her story. And I'm telling you, her books, so worth it. They're so good. And so go check that out. Maybe even if you want, reach out to her directly and encourage her. I just think I'm so appreciative of her taking the time to share with us, to tell her story. I cannot wait to go read. I have one of her books set aside right now for vacation. It's going to be my vacation read, and I am pumped. So I hope you enjoyed the story today, this episode, wherever you are, listeners. Whatever today looks like for you, I'm just praying over you, even this very moment, that God would encourage your heart, that you would run your race in your place, whatever that place looks like today. And know that I'm with you, girl, and I am cheering you on.